in 2005, the Forest Service made a controversial decision to open up large chunks of land, roughly 40,000 acres along the range's eastern slope, to oil and gas leasing.
If you have a use that takes the wild and pristine out of the country, you can't put it back.
I'm not opposed to drilling, but there's a time and a place for everything, and the Wyoming Range is not that place.
The Wyoming Range. For much of its history, the Wyoming Range was a local secret, and the locals were happy to keep it that way. Spanning 150 miles in the southern part of the Bridger-Teton National Forest, the Wyoming Range has been described as a hidden gem, with scenery, wildlife, and stunning backcountry, rivaling that of nearby and better-known mountain ranges, but without the crowds.
The Wyoming Range is so accessible to the people that live in southwest Wyoming, that offers accessibility. People can drive into it, they can, in many parts, they can snow machine into it, definitely ski into it, camp everywhere. They don't need special equipment, they don't need much time from town. It's the community park for us. It truly is. Why do you live here? What matters to you? What are your core values, and what is it that keeps you here? If we take away the benefit of open spaces, getting people in the outdoors, and of course there's a culture of hunting, fishing, being out that is part of why we are here. It's the local person's backyard.
The Wyoming Range, I think, just because of its name, sort of represents the Wyoming way, sort of a way of approaching land and respecting land.
Our state's namesake mountain range embodies much of what people love about Wyoming. Wide open space and lots of it. High peaks, clean water, abundant and thriving wildlife, easy access, tremendous opportunities for fun and for solitude, world-class hunting and fishing.
Yeah, I just put myself in those high prairies and just remembering the times that I've walked up there, with skis on my back or a lightweight backpack in the summer. And I just think about just the vastness and the feeling of really being in pristine land. And to see this area be developed for leasing is just heartbreaking. To see it potentially happen, the thought of it is heartbreaking. It's really one of those places that I know of that has that sort of that appeal, that wide open vastness with the full complement of wildlife and all sorts of species. One of the first trips I did down there was to climb up Hoback Peak. And it was really the moment that inspired a whole lifetime of wanting to go to high places. And it also not only inspired the desire to go up high, because it's so beautiful up high in the Wyoming Range, it's also inspired just a desire to protect those places. Then when I heard about the Legacy Act, I was, very excited that those places might be protected from roading and drilling forever.
As locals know, the Wyoming Range is best described in superlatives. It boasts some of the very best big game habitat in the country. In fact, nearly half of all of Wyoming's moose are found in this range.
Most of the Shiver's moose in the state of Wyoming are counted along the east slope of the Wyoming Range from LaBarge Creek North to Bondurant.
The Wyoming Range is also home to one of the largest mule deer herds in North America. The range provides essential spring and summer transitional habitat for migrating deer, as well as critical stopover areas where the animals can refuel and replenish fat reserves after a long winter.
The value of the Wyoming Range, the Salt River Range, all of this country to this deer population is absolutely vital. Oftentimes mule deer, they're very visible when they're on their winter range. We tend to focus a lot on winter range. The consequences of a bad winter, for example, are very obvious. We can end up seeing a lot of dead deer, that sort of thing. But the result of that is sometimes we tend to devalue their summer range. We often think of summer range as being, it's just a place where everything is grand and it's no big deal. But what's pretty phenomenal, and especially within this range, is that these animals are occupying vast components of this country. We have animals that in some instances are migrating very short distances. They're migrating a matter of only a few miles. And then we have some that are migrating over 110 miles. They're starting from down on the winter ranges near Evanston and migrating deep into the Grays River here in the Wyoming Range.
Every summer, the upper Hoback Basin in the Wyoming Range serves as the northern terminus for thousands of mule deer that migrate more than 150 miles from Wyoming's Red Desert to the lush green foothills of the Wyoming Range. Their yearly journey boggles the mind. It's the longest mule deer migration scientists have ever documented.
The Wyoming Range itself is a destination place for people who love the outdoors and love to photograph and observe wildlife. Wyoming Range also is noted for some of the foremost trophy class mule deer hunting anywhere in North America. People come from all over the country to hunt mule deer bucks in the Wyoming Range, and that's one of the drawing attractions to this portion of Wyoming that makes this such a special place.
The Wyoming Range is also home to thriving elk populations.
We also know that the east slope of the Wyoming Range provides habitat for one of the largest elk populations in the Green River Basin, or west of the Continental Divide. We now know that there are substantial birthing areas or partition areas that elk use in and around the areas that are identified in the leases that are currently being considered.
Hunting season is vacation for us. We take a good 1 to 2 weeks off, and that's where we go for vacation.
I was lucky enough to shoot 3 elk up here. The preservation and the management of this elk herds up here are they're unmatched, unparalleled. It's just something you don't ever see.
And as for the fisheries, no other mountain range on Earth boasts as many subspecies of cutthroat trout, Yellowstone, Snake River fine spotted, and Bonneville River cutthroats, as well as the most imperiled of the 4, the Colorado River cutthroat, are all found in streams in the Wyoming Range. Fisheries biologists consider the Wyoming Range the last best stronghold to recover genetically pure Colorado River cutthroats in the upper reaches of the Green River's tributaries.
The Wyoming Range itself is a priority for the department, primarily because it's some of the last remaining habitat for Colorado River cutthroat trout. Colorado River cutthroat trout are the only native trout to the Green River drainage in Wyoming, and in fact the entire Colorado River. And range-wide, they're restricted to about 14% of their historic range now, and that includes a large portion of the Wyoming Range in Wyoming. The Beaver Creeks, both Horse Creeks, north and south, both Cottonwood Creeks and LaBarge Creeks are the largest portions of their currently occupied range. Roads, well pads, disturbances, pipelines, all those things can change the dynamics within the watershed. We've seen impacts from oil and gas, especially in areas on the southern end of the Wyoming Range where oil and gas development's been occurring for decades, and then you start to see the cumulative impacts of all that disturbance on the landscape and how it's changed the dynamics in the watersheds.
These small isolated populations are really of the highest conservation value because a lot of times those main stem river populations of hybridized cutthroat trout and rainbow trout don't have access to those populations. So for conservation, I would say they're really important.
Anyone who questions the recreational value of native cutthroat in particular ought to come answer my phone during the summer, because I literally get hundreds of phone calls every summer from people wanting to come to Wyoming and fish specifically for native cutthroat within their native habitat. Along with that, there's a growing economic benefit of those people coming here to pursue those fish. And in fact, there's local guides and local businesses who have made specific trips, going out and fishing for those fish within native habitats. I'm a native of Wyoming. I grew up here too, and I think people appreciate the fact that there's still places that are relatively intact prior to European settlement and all the other changes we've made to some of these other areas. So it's important to try and preserve at least some of that.
The Wyoming Range is also a place for people. There is a history of timber harvest. There is oil and gas production in the southern part of the range. Generations of ranching families have also grazed livestock here.
The Wyoming Range, the wildlife resources there, as far as that being summer and transitional range from in the fall and the spring, it's critical to those population bases. I think if you disrupt their summer and spring range, those populations will definitely be impacted.
Outfitters and guides run robust businesses, taking people deep into the Wyoming Range to experience its many treasures.
If you have a use that takes the wild and pristine out of the country, you can't put it back.
And some of the largest and wildest roadless areas in the National Forest System are found in this incredible range, beckoning backcountry adventurers and making it an ideal classroom for outdoor education.
The first winter course that I ever worked for Knowles was in the Wyoming Range, and it is a pretty wonderful classroom to get to take people out and teach them winter camping skills, and students benefit from the feeling of solitude and the feeling of wilderness, and especially being able to go and take part in a winter expedition. People come away with this empowered feeling of self from living in Wyoming in winter. I think if there was oil and gas development in the Wyoming Range, it would negate that as a classroom and no longer allow those places to provide a wilderness experience for our students.
The Wyoming Range's inviting lower elevation meadows, its crystalline lakes and streams, all entice families in nearby communities to make their own seasonal migrations, camping for a week or more in the summer and again during hunting season.
We bring our camper up here and we come up on every day off and we just hike and four-wheel all over and fish, and the kids swim. Lots of deer and just right around camp, and gosh, we've seen moose and bear. It's just so beautiful and quiet. And if, they came in and drilled, then you'd have traffic and the pollution, and it wouldn't even be as safe for our kids to come up here or even for us just to recreate. It would be really sad to see something like this taken over. The future for the Wyoming Range, I hope, stays just like it is. I grew up in northwest Montana in the mountains, and we built a log cabin up there, and I feel like we left and have gone back. It's just been so developed. There's no access. You can't go because everything's been, just taken over, and that's just how this would be. I mean, I want my kids to come here when they have kids, just to be able to do what we've been doing for years. Just come up here on a weekend and camp and fish and have s'mores and put their hammock in between two trees and just enjoy life.
Pretty much every year we come up here, we make new memories, and there's not one better than the next. I have nothing bad to say about our experiences up here in the mountains. I mean, this is why we come up here, is to make new memories.
Given all of its incredible values, it's easy to see how people could take for granted that this beloved mountain range would always provide whatever they cherish most about it now and for generations to come. But they were caught off guard when in 2005 the Forest Service made a controversial decision to open up large chunks of land, roughly 40,000 acres along the range's eastern slope, to oil and gas leasing. This stunning landscape and the proud heritage of the many people who treasured it suddenly faced a very real and a very dire threat. People quickly realized the potential impacts leasing and drilling could have on wildlife habitat, hunting camps, backcountry classrooms, grazing allotments, hiking trails, wildlife migration corridors, trout streams, and on family traditions. To lose any of these would be devastating. What happened next was unprecedented. The Forest Service's decision to offer this beloved landscape for lease to oil and gas companies inspired a groundswell of support from what might have seemed like strange bedfellows. But ranchers, outfitters, hunters, anglers, conservationists, business owners, labor union members, tourism boards, recreational users of all stripes, local city governments, and even some oil and gas field workers were able to set aside their political and cultural differences and join together with a single focus to safeguard all that, in their own words, makes the Wyoming Range too special to drill.
I grew up in Texas, one of those states that was defined by the oil and gas industry, and having seen some of those landscapes decades and decades later, they're no longer viable and no longer beautiful places. And I think Wyoming and the greater Yellowstone ecosystem specifically is something that's like a national treasure, and we should protect at all costs.
I'm not opposed to drilling, but there's a time and a place for everything, and the Wyoming Range is not that place. This is a place that needs to be protected and cared for, and we love it, and that is not a place where drilling needs to take place.
Once you do bring drilling out here with the roads, everything changes and you can't take it back.
It would change it a lot. This is a very, very fragile ecosystem. Oil field development becomes the predominant thing when it happens. It would change it drastically.
There is no doubt that oil and gas development offers economic benefits. Mineral production drives Wyoming's economy. Sublette County, where the Wyoming Range is located, is home to two of the largest natural gas fields in the country. But these massive fields have brought a lot of changes to local communities, and not all of the changes are welcome.
This is balance. This is where we come. This is where people from all over come, and this is where they find their balance and their peace. And so if they're drilling up here, then there is no balance. There's nothing.
The balance here is already made, and you leave it alone, and you got your balance.
Well, I believe the balance is on the side of energy right now, and we need to tip the scale back to the center. Energy's been developing rampantly, over 4,000 holes in the Jonah field, 3,000 on the anticline, and I don't know how many more thousand they're still going to drill. The state of Wyoming has done its part and is continuing to do its part for energy development for the country. But we live here for a reason. We live here because it's special, and this is where we want to raise our kids and watch our grandchildren enjoy as much of Wyoming, at least as close to it as I got to enjoy.
The citizens that came together in support of the Wyoming Range, most of whom were not opposed to oil and gas development, said enough is enough.
The intrinsic value that goes with a wild place really is to some degree lost when you have a high amount of development and human use. For that reason, I do think that we should try to plan energy development in areas that are currently being developed and think hard about where we expand into.
When the oil and gas leases were sold, successful protests and appeals halted development. The Forest Service was found to have relied on outdated information and was instructed to reconsider whether leasing in this place was the right decision. Now, a decade later, and after several false starts and decision reversals, the fate of these oil and gas leases remains in limbo. Even as the Forest Service continues to deliberate about the leases, the diverse group of citizens wanting to see this landscape protected has stayed busy. Their first goal was to secure passage of federal legislation. After many years of hard work by citizens, sportsmen, and conservationists, Senator Barrasso pledged to sponsor a bill. I'm pleased we are moving forward on protecting the Wyoming Range, the heart and soul of our state, Barrasso said. The governor and I share a commitment to the Wyoming Range. We must keep and enhance the sportsman, tourism, and recreation economy of the Wyoming Range. We must preserve this key part of Wyoming's natural heritage. In 2009, with the bipartisan support of Wyoming's Republican senators and its Democratic governor, the Wyoming Range Legacy Act became law, protecting 1.2 million acres of national forest land in Wyoming's namesake mountains from future oil and gas leasing. The legislation was a tremendous achievement, but it didn't resolve the contested oil and gas leases. But it did two important things. The Wyoming Range Legacy Act made clear that the Forest Service could opt not to lease these 40,000 acres of treasured public land. And it also provided a clear path to conservation for the lands already leased for oil and gas development. The legislation ensured that if companies holding valid leases in the range voluntarily sold or donated them for conservation purposes, the leases would be retired and the area would never be leased again. The first test of the new law came from a Texas company hoping to drill 136 natural gas wells on long-held leases at the headwaters of the wild and scenic Hoback River. In response to this plan, Wyoming people said loud and clear, "Houston, we have a problem." Families from Sweetwater County who had hunted and camped in the upper Hoback for generations spoke up to defend this part of the Wyoming Range. Boaters and anglers from Teton County who'd worked to secure the Hoback's designation as a wild and scenic river spoke up. People in Sublette County concerned about the integrity of groundwater and air quality added their voices. and people from across Wyoming, the nation, and the world who recognized the threat to the greater Yellowstone ecosystem got involved.
Houston, we have a problem.
A Texas company wants to drill 136 gas wells on the Bridger Teton.
I've been fortunate to be teaching kayaking and guiding kayaking on the Hoback River for over 18 years. It's an amazing recreational resource with clean water that's close to town for all to enjoy, and it's the last place that anyone should think of drilling oil and gas wells.
I cannot be in this country without feeling a deep, abiding respect and reverence for it. This is not a place for oil companies. Please get involved.
Citizens came up with a solution. They would try to buy out the Texas company's oil and gas leases and then permanently retire them. It took years of effort and a skilled negotiator, but the company agreed to sell. Now citizens just had to come up with the $8.75 million. Within a few short months, and with 2 significant gifts to spur the effort, private citizens and nonprofit groups worked together to raise the necessary funds. By the end of 2012, more than 1,000 individuals had donated whatever they could afford to make this purchase a reality. It was another tremendous win for Wyoming people, who wanted more than anything to protect the tangible and intangible things that made the Wyoming Range so essential to their quality of life. Today, the issue that started it all, the controversial leasing of some 40,000 acres for oil and gas development along the eastern slopes of the Wyoming Range, is the last issue to be resolved. The contested leases, some of which are adjacent to the land the public spent millions of dollars to permanently protect, are still in limbo. The fate of these oil and gas leases and the cherished wild lands that will be implicated if they are authorized lies entirely with the Forest Service.
Wyoming's done its share. We've already given so much of the Green River Basin. That's enough. I think we need to leave some of Wyoming's legacy behind. That's why it's called the Legacy Act.
If the Forest Service ultimately decides not to lease, the companies who issued the highest bids back in 2005 will get their money back. And because these leases sit squarely within the Wyoming Range Legacy Act boundary, these treasured lands will never be leased again. The Wyoming Range story is one of an extraordinary landscape and the ordinary people who came together to protect it. It's a story of the amazing things we can achieve when we work together. But the story isn't over. Soon, the Forest Service will decide what to do with the contested leases. Before it does, the Forest Service will ask for our input. This is our chance to write the ending we want for the Wyoming Range. It's our chance to work together again as Wyomingites, our chance to protect a heritage we share and a place we love. It's our chance to tell the Forest Service this is our legacy. A no leasing decision is the only choice that will protect it.